All right, diving into something absolutely critical for anyone in the U.S. Army, defense support of civil authorities.
DSCA, yeah.
DSCA, right?
This one.
Big one. We're going deep today into Chapter 3 of ADP 328,
Okay.
Organization for Army Support.
Right.
And this is really your guide to navigating the complexities of DSCA.
That's right. And we're talking about how the Army operates right here on U.S. soil, which
Right.
comes with a unique set of rules and challenges, as you can imagine.
Totally different ballgame than deploying overseas.
Oh, yeah.
It's like figuring out a massive, constantly moving puzzle.
It is. It is. And that's where ADP 328 comes in.
Yeah.
It's the playbook.
Okay.
It makes sure everyone from the National Guard to federal troops
Right.
can effectively work together,
Yeah.
even when they don't all report up the same chain of command.
So first things first, ADP 328 really stresses this idea of unity of effort, not unity of command.
Yes.
For those of us maybe who aren't fluent in military jargon, what's the difference?
Okay, so think of it this way. Imagine a massive hurricane just hit the Gulf Coast.
Okay.
You've got local police and fire departments who are just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
The National Guard rolls in to help. And then,
Right.
depending on the severity, you could have federal troops deploying to support.
Right. Right.
Now, all these groups have different bosses, different structures, different ways of doing things.
So I imagine controlled chaos is an understatement.
Yeah, pretty much. But the mission is the same, right?
Right.
Save lives, protect property,
Yeah.
get things back to normal.
Yeah.
Unity of effort means everyone is laser focused on that goal,
Right.
even if they have different bosses or ways of getting there.
Got it. So in that hurricane scenario, we're talking about who are the key players on the DSEA team, so to speak.
You got your state level players, of course.
Okay.
The governor, the adjutant general who leads the National Guard.
Right.
And then as things escalate, you might see federal players like US Northcom or US Spaycom
Right.
step in with their joint task forces.
Joint task forces. See, that's where things always get a little confusing for me. Refresh my memory.
Sure, a joint task force or a GTF.
Okay.
Essentially a temporary headquarters created to command forces
Okay.
from more than one military branch.
Okay.
So you might have Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, even Coast Guard, all working under that JTF
Wow.
to coordinate that overall DSCA response.
So it's about creating that streamlined command structure in the middle of what's probably a very chaotic situation.
Exactly, exactly. And then you've got other players like the Army Corps of Engineers
Okay.
who have some unique capabilities thanks to Public Law 8499.
The Corps of Engineers. I thought they were all about building bridges and dams.
They do that too.
Okay.
But PL 8499 essentially makes them the disaster relief heroes.
Oh, wow.
It lets them bypass FEMA and jump into action during floods and storms with their own pre-existing contracts
Wow.
for things like temporary roofing, debris removal, even providing temporary power.
Huh.
It seriously speeds up the response process.
So they're like the first responders for the really big stuff.
You got it. They bring the heavy hitters literally
Right.
in terms of engineering and logistical capabilities, all without getting bogged down in bureaucratic red tape.
That's incredible. I never realized how much power they have to cut through the red tape.
It's essential in those early hours and days after a disaster when every minute counts.
Yeah.
It's essential in those early hours and days after a disaster when every minute counts.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
What happens when a disaster is so widespread, it impacts multiple states?
Right.
We're talking about a hurricane that rips up the entire East Coast
Yeah.
or a massive earthquake that affects several states at once.
Okay, now that you mention it, that throws another wrench in the gears.
Right.
You could have National Guard units from different states,
Yeah,
multiple federal agencies, all converging on the same region.
exactly. We call that a multi-state catastrophe.
Wow.
And it's one of the most complex scenarios in DSCA.
Right.
Imagine trying to coordinate relief efforts across state lines, each with its own laws, emergency plans, and chains of command.
Right.
It can quickly become a logistical nightmare if it's not handled correctly.
So how do you effectively command and control a situation like that when you've got so many moving parts?
That's where ADP 328 really comes in handy.
Okay.
It lays out two primary methods for commanding forces in a DSCA situation:
Okay.
parallel command and dual status command.
Okay.
These are critical concepts
Got it.
for any leader operating in a DSCA environment to understand.
Okay. Break it down for me.
Okay.
Parallel command versus dual status command.
All right.
What's the difference?
Picture two highways running alongside each other,
Okay.
both heading toward the same destination.
Okay.
That's parallel command.
All right.
You've got your federal forces on one highway answering to their chain of command.
Right.
and you've got your state National Guard on the other, reporting to the governor and the adjutant general.
Right.
They're coordinated and aware of each other's actions,
Okay.
but they operate independently.
So two separate missions, but working in tandem towards the larger goal.
Precisely. Now imagine that those two highways merge into one.
Okay.
That's dual status command.
So instead of two separate lanes, we're combining forces under a single leader.
You got it. In a massive emergency, like the multi...
Right, so all those rules about collecting and handling information get a whole lot stricter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just start spying on civilians because there's a natural disaster.
Right.
ADP 328 is very clear about something called intelligence oversight.
Okay.
Everything has to be done by the book
Right.
with the proper legal authorizations.
Right.
And for very specific reasons.
So what are the rules of engagement for intelligence gathering during a DSCA operation?
Okay, so
What's acceptable? What's crossing the line?
first and foremost, you can't use intelligence gathering capabilities like surveillance drones
Right.
on U.S. citizens unless it's absolutely essential for the mission
Okay.
and you have proper authorization.
Right.
And we're talking about very specific life or death situations like finding a missing child in a disaster zone.
Right.
It's about using those capabilities strategically and ethically, not just monitoring traffic flow out of curiosity.
Right. Right. So there's a really high bar for what's considered justified in a DSCA situation.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of all the information that is collected
Right.
legally and ethically.
Right.
How is that handled?
Right.
Who has access? How is it secured?
Right.
These are critical questions because we're talking about safeguarding people's privacy and civil liberties, even in the midst of a crisis.
Okay, so walk me through it.
Okay.
What does ADP 328 say about handling that kind of sensitive information?
It emphasizes strict guidelines and procedures, especially for commanders.
Right.
Basically, any information gathered on civilians during a DSCA operation is considered highly sensitive.
Right.
There are very specific protocols for labeling it correctly, storing it securely,
Right.
sharing it only with authorized personnel, and ultimately disposing of it properly. It emphasizes strict guidelines and procedures, especially for commanders. Basically, any information gathered on civilians during a DSCA operation is considered highly sensitive. There are very specific protocols for labeling it correctly, storing it securely, sharing it only with authorized personnel, and ultimately disposing of it properly.
It sounds like the Army's walking a tightrope here, trying to effectively respond to a crisis, while also safeguarding people's rights and privacy, no room for error.
You hit the nail on the head. One wrong step could have serious legal and ethical implications. Commanders really need to be incredibly well versed in those procedures. It's not just about securing physical documents. We're talking about digital information too. Every photo, every video, every data entry, it all needs to be treated with the utmost care and in accordance with those strict guidelines.
So practically speaking, what does that look like for a unit on the ground during a DSCA operation? Are we talking about like burn bags for cell phones?
You might laugh, but digital hygiene is no joke in a DSCA situation. When the mission is over, any sensitive information that doesn't need to be retained for legal or operational reasons needs to be securely deleted. And I mean everything from official databases to those photos and videos on personal cell phones.
Wow. Okay, so no casual selfies with sensitive documents in the background.
Definitely not a good idea. Seriously, though, it's all about minimizing risk and respecting people's privacy. Remember, the goal of DSCA is to help people, not to infringe on their rights.
That's a really important point to remember, especially when you're operating in such a complex and sensitive environment. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the basics of unity of effort to the nuances of intelligence oversight. Any final takeaways for our listeners out there who might be on the front lines of the next big DSCA operation?
Absolute. First and foremost, remember that ADP 328 is your guidebook, but every real-world situation will be different. Be prepared to adapt, think critically, and rely on your training second. Don't underestimate the importance of clear and constant communication with so many players involved, from local police to federal agencies. Keeping those lines of communication open is absolutely vital.
It's like that old saying, assume nothing, clarify everything.
Precisely. And lastly, never lose sight of why you're there. It's about supporting your fellow citizens in their time of need, while upholding the values and principles of the U.S. Army. It's a challenging mission, but an incredibly rewarding one.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we leave you with this. How might these command and control structures and the rules surrounding intelligence gathering play out in a large-scale cyber attack? Would a cyber attack on U.S. soil change the DSCA playbook in any way? Food for thought. Until next time, stay safe and stay informed.